Well, my topic this morning is volunteer service, and I've called it In His Majesty's Secret Service.
I like that.
How many people here have been serving the Lord for over 20 years? Pretty much every hand in the room. How many for more than 30 years? Most people. So when I guesstimated that this morning when I was preparing for this, and the number of people here, we're nearing about 1,000 years of service to the Lord in this room. 1,000 years. A millennium of service to the Lord. Sitting in this room.
You old people.
Well, I averaged, of course, Pastor Peter's 51 years of service, and you just add on. And but my thought process with all that is, has it been effective? 1,000 years of service. And how do we gauge success? It's very easy to look at what we thought would happen and what didn't happen, and to say, well, what's the point? I poured it all out. I've done all this for you, Lord, and it hasn't turned out the way either I thought or the way that you initially led me to believe or said to me. And so I want to talk, about 20 minutes now, I want to talk about the point. I want to talk about the point of our volunteer service to the Lord. And Psalm 110 verse 3 says, your people will volunteer freely in the day of your battle, or the day of your power.
What's that again?
The Bible says, Psalm 110 verse 3. Talking about God's people volunteering freely in the day of His power. And there's different ways that we give unto the Lord. Of course, we give our tithes, and we give our time, and we give ourselves. But a little snapshot of where America's at right now. Let's just take tithes real quick. And this isn't meant to be heavy at all. We don't know what people in this room, I don't know, Peter doesn't know. But we're talking as a nation. 2.5%, and the church in America gives 2.5% of their income to the Lord. 2.5%. Let me put that in perspective. In the Great Depression, it was 3.3%.
Wow.
So what has happened? People have stopped giving. They've stopped giving their money. They've stopped giving their time. Why is it that we, as a nation, are in this place? Now, again, it's not a... I look around this room and I brag on the people in this room and the people who aren't in this room but should be in this room. I brag on the group and the team that we have all the time. To other pastors, to my family at home, I say, you wouldn't believe the team that God is bringing here, because it is filled with veterans who are still moving forward in the purposes of God, and who haven't allowed the disappointments and the hiccups to stop them. But I still believe there's something fresh for us to enter into as a people. And so I want to talk about this volunteering freely. Of course, God gave the Israelites instructions on tithes, right? 10% of your tithes. He also, on top of that, the Israelites had to give offerings to the poor that weren't voluntary. These were mandated things. You have to give your tithe, you have to give to the poor, and then there were free will offerings on top of that. Just whatever. And the Bible says that when the temple was, or when the walls in Jerusalem was about to be rebuilt after Babylon, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, right? And it said, and all those whose hearts God had touched went with him. And I see around us these people whose hearts God has touched. People like Art, whose hearts God has touched, who said, I want the glory, and I'm going to go after it until I find it. And that's the group that God's bringing here for the purpose of His revival, because He's looking for a people, that says, who volunteer freely. That word volunteer freely means a free will offering. It means giving a free will offering on the day of His battle, on the day of His power. And so we have battles, and we're entering a battle as a nation, and we as the church have a responsibility to be those people who volunteer freely in the day of His power, the day of His battle. But I want to talk about a couple of the things that can punch a hole in the boat, that can keep us from volunteering freely? Why have Americans stopped giving their finances, their time to the Lord? I would suggest to you because we are living in the example of it in our PTL building, where how many people sowed finances, how many people moved there, gave their lives for something that they thought was going to happen, and then it fell apart, and they said, well, what's the point? Right? They're just disappointed.
Yeah.
So there are things that God can ask us to do that don't end up the way we expect them to. And there are things that God asks us to do, and our job as a people is to make sure that our hearts are ready to volunteer freely in the day of His power. And so I want you to turn to Mark chapter 6. As we go there, I'll just mention that what you serve in is certainly part of your identity, and obviously our identity is not in what we do. Hey, come on in. Cyril, I'll leave you guys here.
Come on in, get some chairs for these folks. Just hold off a second. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Hi. Good morning. Thank you.
Welcome to heaven.
How many more chairs do you need?
If you ladies need to use the bathroom, you're good. Come on in and sit down.
There's a stool right here. Somebody will hold the chair.
I'll go.